cables. Egypt's secret police received training at the FBI facility in Virginia, even as US diplomats compiled allegations of brutality against the service. What do you make of those reports, briefly?
Well, I think that it's very clear that the U.S. and Egypt had a very close relationship between not only their militaries, but also with the police officials, and particularly with the Ministry of Interior. And that was part of an effort to bring in more democratic values, if you will, and to make a professional police force. This is part of what the U.S. Is trying to do. At the same time, in these documents, as you mentioned a moment ago, you're seeing that the embassy was seeing a completely different story. So this, and this is going back to the State Department, obviously, and perhaps circulated to other folks throughout the Washington, D.C. bureaucracy. What you basically have is a couple of different agencies in Washington, D.C. that are trying to achieve certain goals, and sometimes those goals compete against each other.
Hisham Safi Eldon, I mean, that's an important point about this issue here of the collaboration between the American and the Egyptian intelligence and security services. But there are reports compiled by, I think it's Amnesty International, that terror suspects under the Extraordinary Rendition Program were brought to Egypt. They were allegedly tortured. This is something the Egyptian government even acknowledged in 2005, that the US transferred something like between 60 and 70 detainees to Egypt since 2001. I mean, what have you been hearing?
Well, I have to say that the collaboration between Egypt and the United States is a perfect model that has to be followed. I mean, I'm not blaming them for handing over some criminals who committed crimes. Those people we are talking about who have been involved in activities, criminal activities, and it was proving the guiltiness of them by planning, conspiring, doing terrorism activities, not only in the region here, but in global perspective. However, those people, I'm not sure we are talking about the very same people, but those people were mostly condemned in some terrorism activities because the United States government is very keen not to handle any suspect that might be mistreated or even lead to his death under some torture or something like this. They can't take this blame.
Hossam El Hamalawi, let me put that point to you, because I saw you shaking your head there. I mean, Amnesty International goes on to...
Yes, that's not a perfect model at all.
Yeah.
That's not a perfect model at all. I mean, the so-called Western democracies who preach every day like democracy should not support, whether it's financially or militarily, any of the third world dictatorships, let alone the Mubarak's dictatorship. I personally worked on a Human Rights Watch report in 2004-2005, trying to track down those disappeared suspects in the global gulag run by the US government, and which the Egyptian prisons were also part of. The majority of those detainees that were sent to us from abroad on these ghost planes, these detainees, most of them were actually innocent. They just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. And even if they were guilty of committing terror crimes, definitely the US, when shipping them here to Egypt, knew what was going to await them when they arrived here in Cairo. And that did not disappoint actually the Americans. Those suspects, as soon as they arrived, and many of them were taken to the state security headquarters in Nasr City, which we stormed yesterday because it's so close to the airport. That's why the regime built it there, so as to avoid the downtown traffic when it came to shipping those high price value detainees. So I do not regard this as a perfect model, to sum up, and I think that Western governments should stop any sort of dealings with third world dictatorship security services.
Okay, Theodore Karasik, let me get a final point from you because we're running out of time.
Sure.
What's your thought on the issue of extraordinary rendition to Egypt and the collaboration between Egyptian and American intelligence agencies?
It was a system that was in place. I think that it was, as I mentioned before, part of America's outreach. I do agree with the previous speaker that there needs to be a reassessment, if you will, of this type of collaboration. We are entering a new order where dictatorships are falling by the wayside, and regimes that use torture and so on are not going to be tolerated anymore.
Okay, gentlemen, we have to leave it there. Thanks to our guests, Hisham Safi Eldon, Theodore Karasik and Hossam El Hamalawi. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We, of course, welcome your comments and your suggestions. Please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. From the whole team here, goodbye for now.
Whether it's nature or man-made, an event or a memory, time affects our perception and tests our will. Places we go and things we see determine what we know and who we are. Open your eyes to a world of documentaries. Witness at this time on Al Jazeera.
Afghanistan is faced with a huge challenge.
Relations have gone really sour between us and our allies.
We have inflicted considerable damage on the enemy.
The people who make international headlines.
Ultimately, the truth will out.
They want to stop this publication of information that embarrasses them.
Make time for Sir David Frost. Frost over the world. At this time on Al Jazeera.
Information travels in many ways. Opinions constantly formed. Knowledge passes in an instant.
If you want to communicate with those shaping the headlines, this is your chance to ask questions directly to the people making the news. Riz Khan, at this time on Al Jazeera.
It was a revolution which ended half a century of autocratic rule and inspired a wave of public protest that swept across the Arab world.
Internet, Facebook, Twitter, they were not the revolution.
In an exclusive two-part documentary, Raghi Omar traces the roots and repercussions of this uprising and examines why 23 years of dictatorship fell in only 28 days. The Death of Fear, at this time on Al Jazeera.
Still here, still fighting. Gaddafi makes a fleeting appearance in Libya's capital. Hello and welcome to Al Jazeera live from Doha. It's 01 GMT, 3 o'clock in the morning in Libya, where the battle for control rages on. Our reporters with the rebels, bringing us the latest on how they plan to topple Gaddafi.
The pro-Gaddafi forces have aircraft, the opposition fighters don't. It's their one really big disadvantage.
Also on the program, it's not over in Egypt. Protesters come up against armed men in the capital. And France's far-right leader takes pole position. Could Marine Le Pen really become the country's next president?